Welcome to the event Energy and Urban Communities as part of Climate Week New York City. This event is sponsored by EuroMilano, which manages the Uptown neighborhood in Milan. Come see it. We went there as the Foreign Press Association. It's very interesting and very innovative. An aspect we want to touch on today is the added value of participation. Talk about projects that cities are carrying out in the context of the energy transition. This is an important and complex issue, which we will look at from both a broad standpoint and an overview, and get into the details and examples of specific projects. To start out, I will give the floor to Luigi Borré, President of EuroMilano.
Thank you, Andrew. EuroMilano and I are really pleased to host this new Milanese edition of Climate Week New York City. This is our third participation to this important international initiative, and I'm really happy to open this event with my greetings. A few words about EuroMilano. EuroMilano is a real estate development and consulting company. We are committed to the creation and regeneration of cities and the places where urban communities live. So our mission is to meet the needs of urban communities by creating spaces that help them thrive in a sustainable way and without compromising future generation. This is why we are very attentive to and actively foster the development of the vision about urban communities. And this is why, for example, we have been promoting the Global Cities Observatory in collaboration with ISPI, that is an Italian prestigious research institute, and here is represented by Tobias Zevi. Today's occasion is a further example of this attention of EuroMilano. Today, EuroMilano and me are in a listening position for the interesting insights that our panelists will provide us. On behalf of EuroMilano, I personally thank Annalisa Boni, Tobias Zevi, and Marco Mari, with whom we frequently engage in discussions on topics that are dear to us. And thank you to Andrew Spanhaus for his precious contribution by coordinating this session. So thank also to those who will attend this event live or in a recorded form. I don't want to use more precious minutes, so Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luigi Borré. Now, as the moderator and as a journalist, I want to give a brief introduction to the theme and do it on the substance with a little bit of provocation also to get our speakers into the mood about talking so they can tell us about the specific things that are done, these very concrete projects that are being done to deal with the transition. There's a lot of talk nowadays about climate change. This summer in particular has seen a number of extreme and unusual weather events, and naturally the media jumps at the chance to find experts or even people who are not experts to tell us how this is the result of climate change. Now, we know it's not possible to have certainty on this issue, but the models, climate models, generally tell us that such events will become more likely over time and more intense. However, the discussion in the media often is a bit perplexing to me because it gives the impression that the main goal is to just say that these things are because of climate change. And actually, the new head of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, said exactly the same thing. He said, Jim Scaia said, if you constantly communicate the message that we are all doomed to extinction, then that paralyzes people and prevents them from taking the necessary steps to get a grip on climate change. He says the world won't end if it warms by more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. However, it'll be a much more dangerous world. So I think we need a much more discussion of what we need to be doing. And I'm very happy we have the opportunity to do so here, thanks to Climate Week New York City and to EuroMilano. So the issue is, how do we ensure that our societies can handle changes in climate without people's lives getting worse? Now, I don't want to be overly pessimistic, but if the models are right, about what's going to happen. And if countries like China and India continue to exist and pursue economic growth, which is highly likely, then one of the main tasks is mitigation, what we can do. So there are obvious things: be careful where you build, not right on the shore, don't cover everything with asphalt, keep streams and rivers clean. But that's maintenance. And the other question is, well, what can cities do to impact this process as a whole? Active initiatives. And this is what this event gives us an opportunity to talk about. So we have 3 speakers who will address different aspects of the question, first looking at the international scenario and then examining Italy more closely. So we will start with Tobias Zevi. He's an ISPI Associate Research Fellow, also the Commissioner for Public Assets and Social Housing in the city of Rome, in charge of the Global Cities Program at ISPI. Mr. Zevi, you published a report in June of this year entitled The Future of Urban Strategy, Switching Cities On or Off. You start by noting that cities cover just 3% of the Earth's surface, but are responsible for 70% of greenhouse emissions and consume 2/3 of global energy. So cities are key actors. While national governments are called on to develop comprehensive goals, negotiate global agreements, specific action come from the city level, often without guidance from above. So can you give us a picture of what type of initiatives cities are carrying out in Europe and elsewhere around the world?
Thank you very much, Andrew, for this introduction, and thank you all for being here. And of course, thank EuroMilano for this interesting event. I've been other times in participating in EuroMilano's event in the framework of Climate Week New York, so I'm very happy to be here also this year. And I must say, Andrew, that I agree with your introduction. I mean, there is a big issue concerning how we deal also politically with this very, very huge challenge of climate change. So in my speech, I will try to make 3 small introductions and then describe with 3 main chapters what European cities are doing. Of course, the ISPI dossiers I edited was more concerned about energy issue, which is part of our today discussion, but then of course we could decide to move also in other directions. So cities are of course very concrete actors. We know that any global policy which is seeking to protect the planet should be adopted locally in order to be effective. This is something that there is a much big consensus about, and in this respect, of course, communities play a fundamental role in raising the awareness of all citizens, because we know that the engagement of citizens with virtuous behaviors is absolutely crucial to achieve any ecological goal. So, as I was saying, 3 small introductions. The first one is this. We said and we state that cities are fundamental to achieve any ecological goals, but we also could say that the ecological challenge is crucial for cities to gain a role at the global stage. We know, for example, that in recent years, many metropolitan systems have opposed their national governments concerning the environment. The most famous example is, of course, that of American cities deciding to follow and implement the IPCC's agenda established in 2015, despite President Donald Trump which was choosing to deny the existence of climate change and, of course, its consequences. So the first thing is, we could say we need cities to achieve and to win, or anyway to tackle the ecological challenge. But on the other hand, cities need this challenge to be more effective and central at the global stage. Second introduction is about Europe. We all know that Europe has set a very, very ambitious agenda about environment and climate transition. The European Green Deal, which was established in 2019, so before COVID and before war, decided to reduce emissions by 55% in 2030 and reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. So this is a very, very big goal, which was even more enlarged by the so-named Next Generation EU, which was, of course, the amount of funds created because of the pandemic. And I was saying the Next Generation EU created many other sources, funding sources, focusing on sustainability and green transition, with many specific projects also aiming directly to local communities. I'm thinking, for example, of climate neutral smart cities, and of course the very broad program of the so-named New European Bauhaus, designed directly by Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Union Commission, which in a way tried to find inspiration from the continental experiences of the 20th century, and tried also to establish a very interesting relationship, in my opinion, between urban mitigation and adaptation and the vision of urban regeneration, contemporary architecture, and of course beauty in a very broad sense. As a third and last introduction, of course, we need to mention the war between Russia and Ukraine, which started 1.5 years ago. So we were in February 2022. Of course, this tragic and huge event imposed a new agenda to all European institutions and local administrations. And we have to say, I believe, that the European institutions, starting with the Commission, but going through all the line to the local communities, managed to face this huge tragic event with a very effective set of measures. The most famous one is the so-named REPowerEU plan, under which the EU established a voluntary platform which in a way coordinates common purchases of energy for all European countries. And in the same times, the European Council decided to reduce by 15% gas demand reduction target, which was even extended by another voluntary extension of member states. So basically the urgency to reduce dependency on Russian gas was taken very seriously by European institutions and member states, and many measures and actions were implemented. And I think that as Europeans we should be proud of this quick response and effective response. So as promised, these were the three forward, and now I'm asked to describe the concrete policies and practices that European cities are implementing, those that were briefly described in the publication you quoted. So let's say a very simple thing. Talking about this issue, we are mainly talking, in my opinion, about three big chapters, three main goals that relate to any energy supply strategy. So the first one is how to diminish the need, which is of course crucial, for example, due to the war. The second one is how to reduce costs, which is very important, also on a social plan. And we have to remember that when we talk about sustainability, we are always relating environment and social issues and, inclusive development in a way. So how to reduce cost is the second goal. And then, of course, how to increase the production of low-cost renewable energy. And in this perspective, in these three main chapters, we try to pick the most interesting experiences in Europe and in European cities. So talking about the reduce of need, probably the most important challenge is how to make private and public buildings energetically more efficient. This is something huge, because if we think about the real estate stock of any city in our world, and especially in Europe, which is usually an old continent, so with big historical centers made by very, very beautiful, often old buildings, it is easy to understand that to have old buildings efficient in terms of energy, it's quite difficult. So basically, one of the main chapter of cities' engagement towards energy transition is how to take advantage of all the European funds to support big retrofitting programs of public buildings, first of all, so such as schools or offices, and on the other hand, how to attract private investments in order to implement even sometimes complex public-private partnership, which can renovate the rest of the real estate stock. So in this respect, in this chapter, the experiences of cities like Barcelona, Copenhagen, and Paris are absolutely interesting. Many programs have been designed and many actions have been already implemented with work, with concrete actions being taken place already in the first months after the war explosion. So, of course, on like more easier in a way, but more urgent, there were a lot of emergency actions taking last winter, especially. So, for example, the setting of the internal heating of public offices and schools a few degrees lower than in the past, public lighting which was kept a little bit dimmer, and in some case even the moving of the season a few weeks later in order to reduce the need of energy. So basically, I believe that these kind of measures are for sure effective, but they also have a very, very important role in terms of cities engagement. People understand that there is a common challenge. People understand that, of course, there is a common initiative. At the beginning, they might be sometimes against, and this is something which is often happening in transition in general, talking about mobility or taxes or whatever. But then they understand that this is something that it's very important. In general, we need to understand that the issue of real estate and buildings is absolutely fundamental and crucial. Just to give you a number, in 2021, fossil fuels still contributed for nearly 2/3 of the energy used to heat buildings in Europe. So we are still talking about one of the most difficult and, of course, most important challenges we're facing. Then the second point is how to boost the growth of renewable energy generation. Of course, first of all, photovoltaics. So in general, I think this is a common experience. Cities are massively supporting solar generators, mainly on public soil, because this is easier to implement. And in my capacity as commissioner in Rome, I can witness that, of course, it's easier for us to choose public soil to install plants. But there is a very, very big interest also of the private sectors, because, of course, this is something that can be a good business in the future years. So basically, there is a massive increase of these instruments. And of course, there are interesting experiences of circular economy. So just to mention one, in Copenhagen, the citizens are extracting biogas from wasted food, while the rest of wasted food is used as a fertilizer in a true recycling path. And of course, there is the huge chapter of the electrification, which has much to do with energy and environmental transition, but of course causes and requests a big revolution in terms of energy supply. Then there is the third chapter I was mentioning at the beginning, and I hope having been clear in my explanation. Due to the war, many European citizens gained the awareness about the so-named energy poverty, basically cost of living, of many people in their communities, many layers in their community, even layers which were used to being middle class in a way. So in cities like Vienna or Barcelona, there were many initiatives taken to actually reduce the cost of energy. And I'm going quickly because I don't want to steal too much time.
Yes, if we can conclude.
Including. So it is important to know that many researchers show how there is a very tight relationship between social classes and energy. And for example, in my cities, I mean, this is something that requires us much to do. So to conclude, I believe that no challenge in this sector can be won without the ability of public administration, companies, non-profit organizations, and citizens to work together. And this can happen just at the local level. This starts and is born at the local level. And that's why cities are so important, both for achieving the goal, but also for raising a new, healthy, and absolutely fundamental awareness. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's very important to what you pointed out, what you reminded us of more than once, is the social aspect. We can set a lot of goals, but reality requires us, political reality, as opposed to, I would say, morality, requires us to think about what the effects are on people and what the social reaction is. Obviously, this is something Europe has had to deal with the question of energy prices. When having a policy that raised the cost of carbon, you have to be ready to replace it with something else. And if you don't, you risk having a situation where it creates social problems. So it's very important. And obviously, it's from the city level where you can do this the best, as opposed from the national government level. So I think that's a very good point that you brought out. Thank you. Now we come to specific examples in Italy. Annalisa Boni is a commissioner of the city of Bologna in Italy, and she manages the city's PNRR funds, the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, part of the Next Generation EU overall program for the European Union. And remember that energy transition, the ecological transition overall, is one of the pillars of the Next Generation EU. Now, you have worked in the past with hundreds of large municipalities in regard to how European funds are allocated for urban areas. So I'd ask you to give us a general picture of the state of energy transition projects in large European cities, but then hear also about specific projects that Bologna is working on, both in terms of city government, and again, the involvement of the local population.
Right. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for having me in this very interesting panel and also event. EuroMilano and also, the New York climate, how is it called? Climate New York City or whatever. But anyway, it sounds very interesting. I think what Tobia said is a very good starting point, in the sense that he really pointed out the main challenges that cities are living. I mean, the energy transition is the biggest point, is the biggest topic, is the biggest challenge. But what I want to point out from the, let's say, perspective of, other big cities and also Italian cities and then Bologna, is that there's one solution to all that. And that is what also Tobia said at the last, in the last part of his speech, is that you cannot just tackle the energy transition looking just at energy, but you need to tackle the energy transition looking at an overall, let's say, a systemic approach to transformation of the city, and without leaving people behind. So basically, the energy transition has to be part of an overall transformation of the cities, of all cities, looking at who can participate to this transformation, who can enable it, who can actually implement it, who can actually do it, who can participate into it, and therefore, in a way, it's about a journey towards an objective that in this case could be climate neutrality, climate adaptation, which includes energy as well, and energy management as well, considering the crisis in which we are living. So all the cities that I've been close to, that I've been looking at, analyzing, and even being in details, but also the city of Bologna, which is one of the 100 cities that have been selected by the European Union to achieve climate neutrality before everyone else. So not the 2050 targets, but at 2030, all of these cities are taking the challenge in this way, as a systemic transformation, where energy is part of an overall path, of an overall journey. And this means connecting the energy challenges with many other let's say policies. So basically, the majority of cities, including, as I said, the hundreds which have a higher ambition, and of which 9 are Italian. Rome, I talk about Rome because Tobia is there and is deputy mayor of Rome, and the same for me in Bologna. I'm in charge of the recovery funds, but also of the climate transition. So all these cities are acting and are let's say, implementing policies and projects, many of them funded by the recovery funds, that deal with sustainable urban mobility, pushing for cycling policies, even lowering the speed of circulation of cars, because this helps also pollution and also helps people to use less the car.
It looks like we have a...
Can you see
Okay,
me?
yes, we can see you now. Please continue.
We are setting up the tram, 2 lines of tram. So that's the transport part is very important in terms of electrification and also, less CO2 emissions, but also changing all the public lighting to LED. That's a huge thing that cities don't, and citizens above all, they don't really realize that it's also important in terms of energy autonomy, energy, decreasing the costs, but also in terms of efficiency and pollution, but also green, having more green areas. It sounds normal, but it sounds, banal, but that's part of the overall thing. You have to keep things together, not treat them separately. The same, the circular economy and waste management, it was mentioned before. Digital has to be at the service of the climate transition. We are setting up a digital twin that will help absolutely using all the data to inform public policies in a better way, and therefore have more effective policies. The same goes with water, agriculture, you name it. And of course, energy is the biggest one. So energy retrofitting, of course, but you have to start from social housing, and that's, in this case, PNRR in Italy, but also, anyway, the recovery fund in the plans of the recovery facility has been, the same for all cities. Energy retrofitting is a big part, and social housing has to be the big element of the process, because the transition has to be just and fair, otherwise, it cannot happen. And you have, and what we are really working on at the moment is urban planning. So the instruments that are useful for planning the city. And therefore, if you oblige private companies to basically build, for instance, ZEB buildings, so zero energy buildings, this will create a positive wave in the market, and buildings will acquire a stronger value in that respect. But also we are allowing more, let's say, a wider and easier installation of photovoltaic, as Tobia mentioned, so that energy communities can be set up, positive energy district can be set up, and so on. But the biggest and most important element of this all is citizens' empowerment. It's information, it's training, it's education about all these things. So lately, apart from the participatory budgeting that many cities do, we have set up, and it's actually happening now, we have set up an assembly, a citizens' assembly, which is an independent body inside the municipality. So this is a unique experience in Europe. So it's not just an assembly that meets and talks about something. It's really a body. We have changed the statutes of the municipality, and citizens' assemblies can talk about whatever they decide to talk. And the current one is about climate, of course. And it's 100 cities that have been randomly selected on the basis of many criteria, so that they are representative of the society of Bologna, and they are working themselves after many months of information, training, with independent type of information. For instance, ourselves, politicians, we are not allowed inside the group. They are totally independent. And now they will propose proposals, inputs to the municipality to do certain things in the climate, especially in the energy transition. So we have asked them questions, what kind of proposals have you got to help Bologna become more solar, for instance? So that we have seen is one of the best way, because when you go in that, when you see this group working, you can really feel the energy, the real human energy into it, and the motivation. When you empower people, you inform them, and so on, this really results into really change agents. That's what we need. Of course, it cannot happen for the 400,000 or millions that you have in big cities, but it's one instrument that really helps this sort of empowerment. If people integrate change and the need to change, then things happen. Of course, the real responsible are not citizens individual of this climate crisis. Is also, big multinationals and stuff, but we're not there to talk about this. But still, not leaving people behind. So a very strong social climate justice, and working with people in proximity at the neighborhood level, informing them, making them, basically enabling them to play a role. That's the biggest thing that is needed. This is absolutely fundamental for, let's say, for the next months and years to come, if we want to survive as a species, let's say. So if they understand that, even if it's a negative message, as you were saying, then they will be able to, not with like fear or stuff like this, but with very concrete information and stories. Today, the information we have data, but we don't have a lot of, we don't have a cultural, let's say, alternative that is able to really tell stories and allow people to really feel the need to change and that they can change. So we need a lot of that. That's very much, urgent. I haven't followed any of the minutes, so I don't know if I'm inside the time. If I have more, I can say other things. But
you are right on time. So you're right on time. Maybe I'll ask you just a very brief question. You want to bring in citizens, in particular, make citizens feel empowered, but you also noted that obviously businesses, multinational corporations are a key part of this. Do you find Do you find areas of conflict which you have to manage at the local level? Is it mostly let's get anyone who's interested, let's get them to contribute what they can, or do you have certain goals where you need to bring different actors together to move in the same direction?
Well, we are going to, set up a so-called climate city contract. In there, you've got your traditional partners that you would have in a SECAP, in an energy plan or stuff like this. So you have, the utilities, you have the university, you have big companies, research centers and stuff like that. But you need also to bring in associations, cooperatives, small enterprises, startups, associations of citizens. You have to be able to give a role to everyone. So our investment plan, which is included in the Climate City contract, includes, let's say, investments, interventions, actions that have numbers so that you can quantify in terms of CO2 equivalent or money, financial investments, but also other criteria that are more indirectly, having an impact, like the number of people that you manage to train, the number of people you manage to inform or to empower, as we said, and other things, because a lot of the work that, let's say, civil society or the third sector is doing is also so-called indirect. So you don't only have investments, financial investments that, result in very clear CO2 emissions reduction. So that's the thing. So we try to have, in a way, a role for everyone, but with very concrete actions as well, that you can monitor and that can be useful for, understanding where the gaps are for the city, both in terms of financial investments, but also other things, and then look for ways to fill those gaps. But this helps, having a plan, having the capacity to mobilize funds, to mobilize the private sector, because anyway, PNRR is very good and it covers a lot of things. But for instance, it covers our, retrofitting and stuff of the public buildings, but the private buildings is like the 98% of the, the entire number of buildings. So we have to mobilize the private sector for sure. That's the real. And even if we keep on saying European funds, but that's not the answer. It's not the only answer. It's a very small partial answer. It has to be there, but it needs, it has to be more of a leverage towards the private mobilization, let's say.
It seems clear from what you're saying that working in this way, empowering people at the local level, is not only useful for people to feel involved, but it's actually forces the process to be more effective this way.
It's a journey. So everyone has to feel part of this journey. It's the only way we have. It's the last chance, I think.
Well, thank you very much. Now we move on to our next speaker, who is Marco Mari from the University of Bologna again, and then from EFESO, which is an entity for training in social economy. You work in particular on green buildings in the context of sustainable cities and communities. There are various variables to address. We've already heard some about energy efficiency in buildings. There's not only, though, the question of energy efficiency, CO2 emissions, but also land consumption, water consumption, circular economy, the reuse of various materials. So can you talk to us about the role, the path which this type of urban regeneration takes, and also the issue of certifications, because certifications can drive this type of change, and I know there are different kinds. Please.
Thank you, Andrew, for the question, and thank you to Luigi Borré and EuroMilano to invite me to this interesting table. So I think we are more than stressed on a daily basis about the need to deal with climate change. As you remember us, Andrew, the IPCC report us a clear warning. We must act now to avoid the worst consequences. And this phenomena, the climate change, especially impacts cities and urban and peri-urban areas. We are aware about this. And cities and urban areas are too often little space and are in any case fragile and unsuitable for the changes underway. And unfortunately, we have still in mind some big problems. The floods in the Milan area, the floods in Emilia-Romagna and Marche region, let us thinking that these kind of problems are not so far away from us, are really present, and we need to embrace this aspect. We think we need to recognize the role of the city and neighborhood for sure, and embrace an holistic vision. I perfectly agree with Annalisa Boni. It's not a matter only of energy, it's a matter of complex system, and we need to embrace this kind of complexity. So what can we do, and what can we see, which kind of path we can do it? The first is striving to promote centrality of cities and neighborhoods as main actors to undertake sustainable approach to the built environment. We need to talk about built environment, not only about building, as for example, in Emilia-Romagna region, they are doing. They are approaching a special kind of infrastructure, green and blue infrastructure. They are so important for us in our cities for the quality of life and to reduce the impact, to be more resilient. The second is embracing this kind of complexity. How can we do it? Promoting a joint action by several actors, public and private together, is so important, and face in this way we can face the complexity for this kind of transformation. Promoting a new sustainable living approach. We need to understand that we need to consume less energy, but we have a little to change our behavior, our ways of living in any case. And the third is to use existing tools. We have a lot of tools to support circular thinking, to embracing accountability, and to account energy and environmental impacts. The third one, I think it's important to think about taking into account and taking inspiration from our ancient culture, ancient ways of life. We are aware about the existence of tools, for example, energy environmental protocols like LEED, and in New York they are for sure aware about that. LEED is the Leadership in Energy Environmental Design Protocol rating systems for buildings, but there are different kind of tools, for example, for green and blue infrastructure, something like sites, and another rating system that can help us to have a clear vision, a clear approach on this kind of infrastructure to be more resilient. Under this aspect, Italy is not, we can say, we have a good position about this, because in Italy there are more than 20 million square meters of buildings undergoing certification with LEED and GBC protocols, and more than 10 million square meters already certified. Italy is the second country in Europe for use of these kind of protocols, and in 9th in the world. But another point is really important about our position. As Tobia Zevi told us, we need to embrace a new vision, a new Bauhaus, for example. As Annalisa Boni say, not only a holistic vision, but to take into account another aspect, that we have a lot of historic building. So we in Italy define a new paradigm of sustainable living that places people and environment, something like culture and sustainability, at the forefront. And I think it's important to understand this, to start from a definition. What is a green building? We have internationally recognized green building from the definition of ASHRAE, from the Green Guide of ASHRAE of 2006. a green building is a building capable simultaneously to reducing the consumption of natural resources, the emission that negatively impact our internal environment and our planet's atmosphere, the discharge of solid waste and liquid effluents, the negative impact on the ecosystem, and all this while maximizing the quality of the indoor environmental quality. We do not forget that we live inside building, not outside. And inside building, we breathe terrible things. So it's really important to have this vision. But starting from this, that is the ISPI definition of a green building, we add a new intent, introducing, for example, in GBC Italia, a new intent merging two aspects. The two aspects allow us is heritage and sustainability, and allow us to take into account the correct preservation of historic culture while preserving the environment. The right construction, envisioning to design and build assets capable of lasting a long time. This is really important. We need to avoid action based on a purely speculative and consumerist approach. So in this case, in Italy, we define a new energy environmental protocol called GBC historic building, and is used today in Italy because public administration with green public procurement processes, they are asking to have this kind of capability, to this kind of accountability process with energy environmental protocol. So today, for example, if we see at the recent document called Impact Report on Certified and Sustainable Construction in Italy, it's a report by GBC Italia, we have estimated benefit not only about the 20 million square meter of green building in Italy, but we estimated what we can do by 2030. And it's over 5,000 tons of CO2 potentially saved every year. More than 3.6 billion liters of water potentially saved every year. We do not forget that we have a big scarcity of water in the world. And this means over 189 million euros of negative externalities potentially avoided to our country and to the world, to which are added over 9,000 tons of waste potentially saved. You know that 30% of materials around the world are required by this chain, that is the build chain, and 40% of waste is produced by the same chain. So it's circular thinking needed, and is the best place to do it. And so I can think that we must focus now on this action. The good news is that Italy have a lot of tools, not only international one, but national one. And maybe we can use it to the level of neighborhood, using to the level of buildings, using to the levels of green and blue infrastructure. So all the assets are a part of. But we must do this, not for the planet, for ourselves, because the extinction is our problem, not a planet problem.
Thank you. The question of consuming less energy intrigues me, but it's interesting the way you put it. It's different to go to people, to citizens, and say you need to consume less energy than it is to develop programs overall where we're saying buildings are consuming less energy. That is, making investments which allow us to not waste energy. Because in our individual lives, and we all know that, and also for the way society works, we need a lot of energy. We need a tremendous amount of energy.
Yeah,
right?
But we have in our culture this, you know, when I was young, my grandma gave me the bread, you know, the whole bread, little pasta, you know, but it was good enough to eat, you know. We have inside our culture. If you go in our small cities in the country, you can see they use everything 2 times. They reuse, recycle everything. And the reason why that a country like Italy doesn't have a lot of materials, a lot of energy, you know. So we need to re-embrace the kind of culture. We are capable of this. And it's important today for city level, regional and national level to help and give some incentive to the private sector. But we are working very fast with the public sector, obliging the public sector to do this. So I can say the public sector must do this because it's for a common value. Is something really important for the community. And the private must do it, not only for itself, must do it and for the money of energy and water consumption paid. But it's important to give some incentive to this area, to the private area to do this. We can do it. And then measuring happens as strengthening. Because today, for example, applying LEED protocols that are used in more than 200 countries, we have the 80% of the certified building, more than 1 billion square meter, to the level of platinum and gold level. What does it mean? 80% is a huge amount. That means that Italian culture is really capable of this kind of regeneration. If we measure, we can be proud of this. And I think to be proud is another important part of the change.
Okay, thank you. We have a few minutes left. I'd like to give each speaker just 1 more minute, 1 or 2 more minutes to, if there's something that you want to add, but also to ask you a question. I would encourage you to think in these terms, which you've already talked about, but if we can distill the issue of how to involve people, how to convince people that they need to be involved, not only because someone is telling them to do it, because it's their need. That is, in economics, there's the concept of the nudge that we push people, we give them in some sort of incentive, which leads them to do something which is good. So that which is in our personal interest, we need to make it also in societal interest. So if you could each also give us an idea of what, you know, your specific message to people, to citizens, is of why this needs to be done, not only from the standpoint of, you know, in order to survive, okay, but what can we do? You know, how do you think we can bring the practical effects to people in terms of their participation? Tobias Zevi.
Very quickly, and thanks everybody for the valuable contributions. I would just give 2 examples to understand what we should do and what we should not do. First example, in Rome, we are facing a very, very strong opposition against a measure we took as city government regarding the forbid for many old cars to enter the central area of the city. And this typical situation is related to the feeling of citizens: I am poor, environmental transition makes my situation even poorer and more complicated. Exactly. We were not able to explain many people how, this measure is necessary. And on the other hand, we were not able to negotiate this decision at every level in order to make it more acceptable. The good example is we are finally starting the first experiment of so-named energy community in Rome. It's an experiment in which the energy produced by solar plants on the roof of a common area, a common building, is efficiently divided among people living in that building or in that group of buildings, and even more sold, if the energy is enough, to other users outside the community, which means not wasting electric energy, because of course you can have that the family which is leaving more the house in the morning, and the couple which is leaving it more during the day, and all different habits which are now wasted with a normal consumption, a normal organization. Instead, with such an innovative but sustainable organization, you can have an effect in which everyone sees the saving on his or her personal invoice, and on the other hand have the feeling of the community working together. So basically, these are, in my opinion, the two main aspects what we should work on: speaking with people, and on the other hand, of course, showing people the advantage of this transition. And I quote completely what Annalisa said before: this is not a matter of public investments. It's not a matter of public policy. This is a matter of private and people engagement at any level, starting from the root grass organization, going to the big companies, which can, of course, provide the necessary funds. Thank you very much.
Excellent example. Thank you. Annalisa Boni. So how do we get these private, in a short amount, how do we get the private economy, the private community going in the right direction?
Well, for me, it's really about proximity. I could say it forever, because I mean, we've decided since already now 2 years, we spend 1 week every month in a different neighborhood. And there we just meet with everyone in the neighborhood. We go in little areas, in little squares. We speak with the private sector that is based there. We speak with students. We speak with citizens, basically. And it's really about, talking, explaining, exchanging, listening. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of time, but it's really the only way to basically share, inform, and help people to get information that it's not only the sort of emotional information they get in terms of, oh, how many parking spaces you are taking away from me, but we understand the whys and what are the alternatives. So explaining the opportunities that you open up with the change. So it's really about nurturing the relations with the communities, which means also changing the administration. It's a big effort, because you change the way in which you deal as administration with the communities. It's a direct relation. You have to basically work a lot with the neighborhood administration, which are not used to feel empowered and feel the responsibility of complex projects as well. They tend to say, oh, you do the difficult stuff and things like that. So it's really about, going in school, of course, information and education at school, and promotion of, the ecological concepts and ways, and even easy stuff that if you learn from when you were a kid, you just learning, and it's inside you, and you do it, and you teach it to your parents. So that's, but that's not banal, but it's, clear. The proximity and the fact that you spend time, and you create networks, you create communities around those challenges, and you build responses that with them is, for me, the real sort of effective way to bring everyone along. But I mean, the main point is that this is a complex, the management of the climate emergency and crisis is the most complex and full of contradictions process that we have today. Okay. So you can't, there's no one off the shelf thing. You just have to, do things, experiment, just, as we say in Italian, pull up your sleeves and just work hard.
Marco Mori, it's complex. How do you think we can convince people that the places where they live, their lives, these things which sometimes seem hard, sometimes seem hard can also benefit them locally?
Three things, I think, three suggestions. The first one is to be aware of what is happening, not only from the bad side, the climate crisis, but from a good side, the good example that we have in our country. I told you about the Energy Environmental Protocol and this kind of certification that stands for more than 1,400 buildings. It's something like a city in Italy of 400,000 people living in something that consume less energy, less water, more circular economy, more health and comfort spaces, and so on. You know, it's a lot of things that we must be aware. And to have this awareness, maybe it's a good idea to read at the GBC Italia Impact Report that you can download via website. I think it's important because you can see that, for example, Milan is the second city in Europe with more than 500 buildings for this, but it's not public matter, it's a private matter. And the reason why is that the finance is asking this. A rating system is a simple indicator related to the risk of the investment. So this is the reason why Milan exploding with these good practices. But if you see at Rome level and Lazio region, you can see more than 163 growing faster in last year with a lot of historic building too. If you look at Bologna, Emilia-Romagna region, you can see a lot of things, a lot of renovation made with these protocols. For example, the area, the ex-manufacture of tobacco's area in Bologna is going in this way all over. And there are a lot in Emilia-Romagna region of historic building with this approach. So we need to start in recognizing best practice, and we need starting to give value to this big practice. And the reason why is that we need to say to our future generation that there are solutions and we have a future. Otherwise, everything stops. And to do this, the last suggestion is to starting from the building of the schools, where I think the young people, our children, can embrace this new culture of sustainable living. Living in a perfect way, in any case. Doing, in any case, a sustainable development, but sustainable one, not only development. And I think in Italy, we have all the culture to do this and all the instruments to do this. It's only a willingness that the biggest city and the small cities must do it. And I think it's the path.
Thank you, Marco Mari. Thank you, Tobia Zevi. Thank you, Annalisa Boni. I think just to conclude very briefly, what is clear here is the situation is complex, as Boni said. It's a complex amount of, a massive amount of things, of projects and goals to be worked toward, and you have to work towards them together. You can't just say, okay, we have one thing to do. Let's work in this area. In order to, if you do things together, then you're able to bring people along with you. If you bring people along with you at the local level, you have a much better chance of actually getting something done. So thank you for sharing these experiences with us. It's been very interesting. Thanks in particular to EuroMilano and Luigi Borré for having sponsored this event, and goodbye.